All right, and we're going. Hey, Evan, this is Evan Haney. Evan, before we get started, just want to make sure that you're okay with us recording you and sharing that with the professor for the class.
Absolutely.
Awesome, thank you so much. So Evan, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what you've been up to, your PC experiences, and kind of what you were involved at, and what and how that impacted you?
Right. So I graduated from PC in 2017, and then I went on to law school. I graduated from law school in May of 2020. While at PC, I was involved in Sigma Nu fraternity and various musical ensembles and student government.
Awesome. Well, that sounds pretty much about like me. I
Yeah.
was currently a Sigma Nu senior, singing choir for 2 years, did handbells,
Yeah.
pre-law minor, and just finished up my term as SGA president. So a lot of
Nice.
stuff that we I think we had in common, and I hope that they'll be able to. Hopefully, they worked out pretty well in preparing you for law school and eventually the professional world. So,
It did. Yeah.
um, tell me a little bit about like some of the things your professional academic background, both at PC law school and maybe things that you worked at before that, and what kind of led you to getting to the legal field and being a part of what you are today.
I think I've always had an interest in becoming an attorney and practicing law. I'm not sure if I can pinpoint an exact thing that influenced me to go in this direction, but I do know that when I was at PC, I majored in music, but also political science, minored in philosophy and pre-law studies. Um, and that really helped guide me towards going to law school. And I'm really glad I did because I do love it, even in during these trying times. But yeah,
I know for me, like when I was trying to look at what direction I wanted to do, I went home and told my parents I want to be a political science major. They said, "Oh, okay, well you have a plan for it." So I started looking and seeing what I think I really enjoyed and what I was good at. And I found that like I loved representing people in student government. I did it in high school. I loved the analytical mindset as well that I took in my pre-law classes. So I'm glad that you were able to find a good place that really fit you as well. Let's see. So tell me a little bit about what you do, who you work for, and what roles that you kind of play.
right now I work for the Seventh Circuit Solicitor in Spartanburg County. I started working there in September. Um, so I graduated in May, started working there in September. So it took a little while to find a job during the pandemic, but I'm really glad I found this one. And right now, I help prosecute cases generally in the realm of property crimes, so things like theft, burglary, grand larceny, etc. I also have gotten to work on a couple of murder cases, which is exciting. And soon I'm going to be start working on DUI cases.
Awesome. No, I think that's awesome, and I guess it's really interesting to me is that you work for the state, right? So tell me a little bit about like specifics like that job process. Did you know someone who got you into the solicitor's office? Did you, how did that look?
Yeah, I've got some stories, and I don't know if I could tell all of them, but so I think one thing that got my foot in the door is because I knew the solicitor's golf buddies, and that never hurts. It
No.
never hurts to shake some hands and get people whispering about you. So um, I had that going for me, and also I had good academic background. Went to PC. His daughter went to PC as well. My boss, and she was my year. Um, so yeah, I think everything on paper and knowing his friends definitely got me the job.
So you said his daughter went to PC, which certainly didn't help. Is that something you've noticed kind of throughout your friends who've graduated and through your early professional life that PC really kind of does help bring you to that next step in your potential professional career, or is that just one time kind of thing?
I think so. I mean, I was really surprised. There were some people that I went to law school with that graduated a few years before me at PC, but we were the same year in law school, and it just broadens your scope and your horizon of people that you know. Um, Networking is always good. It never ever hurts.
Yeah, I love how we have such a tight knit alumni base here. I think it's something that's pretty helpful and that we need to hopefully continue to use and look out for our fellow Bluehoes as we continue to move forward. Um,
Absolutely.
so you mentioned a little bit about the pandemic, that job search was a little different. In the legal field, I know everyone's seen the videos gone viral of the attorney with the cat. on the Zoom on the Zoom filter. How has COVID-19, the pandemic, changed your professional life, and what you expect it to normally be like?
It's been really strange. So everything went into lockdown in March of 2020, and that's basically when courts stopped, both civil and criminal. There have been no trials. There have been very few grand juries called. The only thing that we do have right now that that's pretty much normal is plea hearings, albeit it's all on something like Zoom. It's another software, but it's another video conference program. But logistically and technically, it's been very difficult. You can imagine some older judges not getting used to computers very well. So it's a hassle to kind of get everyone together on the same page.
Yeah, absolutely. I know, just being a student, having to adjust last year when we all got the 2-week spring break that turned into 2.5 months through summer. How difficult it was for us sometimes to make that transition, and things like that. So I can only imagine an older, attorney who's been older judge who's been on the bench for, so long, the challenges that can be like. What do you think? And this might be a big question, maybe even beyond something that you might know the answer to, but what do you think the impacts are for everything kind of shutting down like that from the legal system and stuff like that?
I think the biggest problem that we'll face going forward in my job is because there's been no trial since March of 2020, there's going to be a huge backlog of cases once courts do open back up again. Hopefully, they're saying they're just going to open back up in April of this year. So once April comes and we open up courts again, there's just going to be an all hands on deck, free for all of people trying to get their cases heard. And this may be a backlog that we'll be experiencing for quite some time.
Gotcha. I'm sure that's going to be a very exciting time whenever they open back up for you and in your office and other offices around the state and the area. Tell me a little bit about PC going into law school, your law school experience specifically. How did PC kind of help prepare you for that?
I think pre-law studies with Erin McAdams was very helpful. I took a couple of classes with her, and that was probably my first experience reading actual case law, which is all law school is. All you do is read cases and then argue them in class. So that was a pretty good primer, although it wasn't quite as rigorous as law school. But no, I think PC helped me a lot. I knew people going into law school that I went to PC with. That was good. And again, as I said earlier, professionally, it's helped me quite a bit.
Absolutely. And I love, Dr. McAdams is my advisor, my pre-law and political science advisor. She's phenomenal. I'm currently in our constitutional law class right now, which is civil rights and liberties, which is so exciting. Right. She's so passionate about it. And I have definitely been pushed in that area of reading those super dense legal readings, right? And those super dense sort of texts and things like that. So I'm glad to hear that has prepared you at least a little bit, and getting the training wheels off, going into law school. Did you rely a lot on those fellow PC grads that were a little bit older and maybe even your own year, and in law school and studying and asking questions, stuff like that?
I did, yeah. One of my good friends, Jamie George and Trey Harrison, who graduated from PC a few years before I did, they were in law school a couple of years ahead of me. And I relied on them a bunch. They would give me outlines of classes and cases. Any question that I had, I probably went to them first before I went to my professor. And if they couldn't answer it, then I would go to my professor. But it's good to have, good friends like that from PC helping you out.
Yeah, and Trey and Jamie both, they adjunct taught at PC last year. Right. And I was lucky enough to be in their South Carolina law class, which was so much fun. So really, really exciting to hear that, there is some help out there. Maybe I'll be able to rely on some of my fellow Bluehoes as well, moving forward in those connections. What, in hindsight, what would you have done differently in law school? I mean, would you have had a certain approach that you didn't have? Well, tell me about your approach, and then, what you might would have done differently.
Well, for context, when I was at PC, I was very involved in, every student organization, which most students at PC are because it's so small and everyone takes a huge burden to get things going. So when I went to law school, I took the opposite approach. I did not want to be involved in anything but school. No extracurricular activities, no journal, nothing like that, because I was so anxious that the actual schoolwork would fall behind if I paid too much attention to other things. So although law school turned out well for me, I think if I could go back, I would take some pressure off of myself about doing well and just enjoy the time that I had there. Maybe participate in some other activities, other groups outside of just school.
Absolutely. Was there any particular groups that you really kind of felt like you could go back and do again? Just as someone who's looking at potential organizations when I get there eventually, what are kind of what would you suggest that we look into?
So like SGA, the Student Government Association, law school has something called the Student Bar Association, which is pretty similar. They represent the student body to the school. They also plan parties and things like that. So I'd probably do SBA, and there's also 3 or 4 journals at the law school. It would have been nice to go back and join one of those. Although that is a lot of work, and that's probably why I didn't do it in the first place. It's like having a job and going to school at the same time. I just didn't want to do that.
Absolutely. Is that something that you would recommend that we jump right in the fall semester when you first get there as a 1L, or something that you might want to get your feet situated before you dive in head first?
I think with SBA, the Student Bar Association, you could jump in as soon as you get there in the fall. That's a good way to also make a ton of friends at the very front end of law school. So you're not, worrying about that later on. But with the journals, I think you have to start those not in the fall, but in the spring of your first year. I think there's a competition of like a writing competition, and that's how you get in, something like that. But yeah, I think you have to wait on that one.
Gotcha. Well, cool. Going from law school though, to practicing in state with the state, do you think there was a strong correlation between going to USC, which is an in-state school, which is in a very interconnected state bar-wise? Do you think that was the right decision if you want to practice here in the state and stuff like that?
I think so. I mean, it comes down to networking. Graduating from USC, I could practice anywhere, but if I go to Virginia or Illinois, I'm not going to know that many people because the people I went to school with were all in South Carolina. Most of them will be in South Carolina. So it helps in that regard. Every firm here will have people that you either went to school with or or they know someone that you went to school with. So it definitely helps if you want to practice in South Carolina to go to a South Carolina school.
Absolutely. No, that makes a lot of sense. I guess one of my final questions for you is, what advice do you have for former PC students who are looking to go to law school and then eventually after that practice?
I think the first thing PC students should focus on is LSAT practice, which is the law school entrance exam. Doing well in that will set you up tremendously. You can probably get scholarships too for law school, which they don't really hand out. If you do well in the LSAT. Second point, I think the best advice I could give someone that's entering law school now would be to be proactive and be vigilant. They don't really hold your hand in law school. Assignments will be listed on the syllabus and then no one will ever mention it. And then 3 months go by and it's like, oh, well, this thing is due. You have to be very proactive, look at the syllabus, talk to others in your class, and then talk to the professor outside of class. It was a lot different than PC in the fact that I didn't really feel like I knew my professors at USC. They're great people, I'm sure, but at PC, I developed a friendship with my professors, I guess because of the smaller class sizes. But when you're in class of 90 people, it's hard to make that connection unless you really try hard.
Sure, absolutely. That makes sense. I'm going to ask a follow-up question to that. I know I kind of have a decently good idea, but hope maybe you could shed a little bit more light on it. I know when you're a 1L, they kind of divide you up into 2 or 3 different cohorts of the class, right? If I'm not mistaken. Does that kind of stay the same way with those 90 person, whatever, however big your group is that you have all those classes together with? Does that stay the same after your first year, after your first semester, or does that kind of break up and redistribute itself again?
It's basically just for the first year. You'll be in one of 3 sections. It may be different now because things are online, but when I was there, it was one of 3 sections. I was in section 1, so that meant I had, 6 professors. We all had the same 6 professors, and then the other 2 groups had different sets of 6 professors. But yeah, I think after that you sort of get mixed in with the other sections after your first year. But it is helpful once you get to the second, third year. You know all the people in your first section or in your section very well. And it gives you a chance to kind of branch out and meet people from other sections.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. And so I'm kind of excited for that kind of idea of hopefully getting to know one group really, really well. I think that kind of, I'm not sure you might feel differently, but I think PC does a really good job of that, making sure you know your classmates well. Do you think law school also does that, especially USC, do that as well?
Yeah, there's a little bit of that. It's not quite as strong as the bond you create at PC or in college generally, but before you start, there's an orientation period, and they divide your section even further. So you're like in a section of a section, and there's maybe 20 people in that group. And there you go and do like have dinner together and have meetings together before school starts. And then once school starts, you generally study with that group, that core group that you met very first. Yeah.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. Another question I had is, as far as time management goes, I've heard there's a couple different strategies in law school, and of course that's to change as assignment and workload gets heavier and lighter. I tried to come into PC with the mentality of doing, try to get as much work done as possible before basically 8 o'clock or whatever the case may be. I've heard at law school, some people get up early, do their work during the day and enjoy their evening. Sometimes people a lot of people will end up reading till midnight every night. What kind of work for you, and what would you recommend we try to accomplish as new students?
Let's see. Well, first a story. My first week in law school, I think I got home one night. It was really late from like a class that ended at 6 o'clock, and I was getting ready to start on my homework for the next day. And I looked at my syllabus, my assignments that I had written down, and I said, this must be a mistake. This has 65, 70 pages on here that's due tomorrow that I've got to read and be prepared for. And it wasn't a mistake. It was the right number of pages. But you end up just doing it, and then eventually it gets easier as the more you read, the faster that you read. You know where to look in cases to find certain pieces of information. It's very formulaic, but when you first look at it, it looks just like a bunch of words. And it becomes fun to read once you know those little tricks and where things are. What I did was I did most of my readings for the next day. I did those readings between classes the previous day. So if you had an hour in between classes, I would use that hour fully to read for the next day's classes. So that saves a lot of time at night. I didn't have to study or read too late at night, although there were a few instances where there was just too much work. I couldn't get it done during the day. And my approach now is my approach before I graduated was, I think generally, if you had too much to read and you could not read it in between classes, I would get up early in the morning to read instead of staying up super late. I think that's a little better tactic.
Absolutely. I'm a morning person. My roommates kind of roll my eyes at that whenever I'm making coffee at 7 o'clock in the morning, but I think I'll probably try to take the morning approach as well. I think it makes sense for me. Well, I guess last question for you. Anything else that you kind of really want to talk about today or ask about?
I don't think so. I think we pretty much covered all that I've done in the last few years.
Well, I can tell you, PC misses you. I especially the class last year in my fraternity, they talked about you a lot. So I'm glad that we had an opportunity to kind of catch up a little bit.
Yeah.
So thank you, and I really enjoyed our interview today. So
yeah, thank you, Reagan.
Awesome.